Anarchism and Social Revolution, An Anarchist Politics of the Transitionary State by Brian Williams. Springer, 2023. Preface. This book's purpose. Transformative goals. How can societies maximize freedom and equality, or equal liberty, more tersely, in the context of the modern sovereign state system? This is the central research question motivating this book. This question, perhaps because it is so basic, has been obscured, it seems, by a welter of intriguing but more or less desultory queries regarding various aspects of our individual and political lives. However, the current historical moment calls for revisiting the basic question and refreshing our shared sense of purpose and direction. The malaise and morbid symptoms of the current historical moment reflect our failure thus far to do so. As this book's title suggests, its argument focuses on the topic of anarchism, the social movement which aims to maximize equal liberty, as well as social revolution, which, it will be argued, is needed to advance the cause of equal liberty beyond the current state of affairs. The subtitle of the book was inspired by John Clarke's recognition, in his book, Between Earth and Empire, of the, quote, need for an anarchist politics of the transitional state, close quote. Something I seek to provide with this book. Like Murray Bookchin's book, The Ecology of Freedom, which he describes as having an unabashed messianic character, this book is highly ambitious. Specifically, this book contributes to transformative change in 4 domains. 1. Anarchist philosophy. This book's new perspective on anarchism has the potential to enhance anarchism's popularity, rendering it suitable as a new cultural paradigm by clarifying its often murky relationship with mainstream political participation and more adequately addressing concerns about bad anarchy. 2. Cultural paradigm shift. The book advances a new paradigm, libertarian social democracy, with a vision and level of ambition proportional to the demands of the current historical moment. Such bold ideas are needed to overcome the current crises of neoliberalism and liberal democracy, and to continue the historical march toward equal liberty. 3. U.S. politics. The book presents a rigorous argument for social revolution in the United States, which will be needed to fully address its own contemporary policy problems and to catalyze a broader paradigm shift, potentially reviving the view of the United States as a city upon a hill, to borrow Winthrop's phrase. 4. Interdisciplinarity. As a byproduct of these goals, the book also promotes a new interdisciplinarity between anarchism and comparative politics, conducive to breakthroughs in both fields. A new normative sense of direction for political scientists beyond liberal democracy, and an enhanced anarchist understanding about how institutional choices can affect anarchist progress. A new perspective on anarchism. A key development in this book's argument was learning about prefigurative principle and its centrality to anarchism. As some readers may be aware, the prefigurative principle, as applied to anarchism, emphasizes the need to incorporate the anarchist goal of non-domination into everyday praxis in life, thereby increasingly realizing the anarchist goal of freedom and equality, or equal liberty, in the here and now, rather than waiting for one big revolutionary event in the by and by. One of the basic implications of prefigurative strategy is a more or less strict prohibition on the use of state power as an instrument for anarchist progress. Thus, learning about prefigurative anarchism brought into relief how the gradualist perspective presented in this book contrasted with the traditional anarchist view that states are more or less incapable of facilitating a transition to a free and equal society. Indeed, even liberal democratic states may help to stabilize upper-class rule and thus make equal liberty more difficult to achieve. There are 2 central arguments made in this book that go against conventional anarchist thinking, but also connect anarchism to comparative politics, as explained in Chapter 1. First, state-based institutions can potentially be more conducive to equal liberty maximization than the decentralized or non-state counterfactual. Second, some state-based political institutions are more conducive to anarchist progress than others. This book's argument assumes that state-based political institutions can be used consciously, that is, through direct involvement, to promote equal liberty, understood as anarchism's central aim. But only after a successful social revolution in the political, economic, and cultural realms, where needed to maximize equal liberty. Revolution in the United States. In addition to its contribution to political philosophy, this book also seeks to promote actual change in the real world. In other words, this book engages with both theory, part 1, and praxis, part 2. With regard to the latter objective, the book focuses primarily on the United States, for a few reasons. First, as the most powerful country in the world, transformative change within the United States is essential not only to its own domestic policy reforms, but also broader changes at the international level. Also, as a lifelong U.S. citizen, I am in a better position to analyze social affairs in the United States. Over the course of this book's development, conditions in the United States have become increasingly ripe for its revolutionary argument. A long list of deeply rooted policy problems, the failure of the two-party system to adequately address the major issues, popular support for transformative change, and crises associated with the contemporary neoliberal and liberal democratic paradigms. While the broader objectives advocated in this book, Anarchism and Social Revolution, may strike some as too radical, it will be argued that the current historical moment calls for transformative changes of this magnitude, rather than reformist politics as usual. One advantage of focusing on transformative change is that it shifts the reader's attention away from politics as usual in the United States and toward the larger historical context. Contemporary U.S. politics seem characterized by a combination of right-wing distortions, lies, half-truths, spin, etc., and threats to our basic rights, as well as a liberal preoccupation with reformism and attempts to counter those distortions and threats, thus allowing the right wing to control the agenda. As Hacker and Pearson observed during the Trump presidency, almost everything we read today is about President Trump and his outrages. This book transcends this depressing and futile situation, refocusing our attention on the bigger picture and charting a path toward real solutions to today's social problems. Argument characteristics. Primarily a work in political philosophy. Overall, this book could be more accurately characterized as a work in political philosophy than a work in political theory. By political philosophy, I mean basically rigorous normative argumentation regarding social affairs. In a similar vein, Leo Strauss, in his 1957 article, What is Political Philosophy?, described political philosophy as the pursuit of knowledge about the good life and good society. By contrast, political theory is sometimes understood as exegesis, or the development and application of methodological approaches to the interpretation of canonical texts. See, for example, Chapter 4 of John Gannell's 1979 book, Political Theory, Tradition and Interpretation. Of course, these two approaches are not mutually exclusive. Political philosophy often involves the interpretation of canonical texts, and authors focusing on the interpretation of canonical texts often seek to advance their own normative arguments. In line with political theory's emphasis on interpretation, this book's argument aims to build upon existing works from several fields, especially anarchist philosophy and political science. In that sense, the argument reflects what Rakestad and Graydon refer to as rational reconstruction, according to which they, quote, take an ongoing body of ideas and practices as our point of departure, and then aim to make sense of the large and at times complicated literature on the topic, close quote. However, while I have sought to incorporate and build on the relevant existing theory, my own argument has remained behind the wheel of this book throughout its evolution, consistent with the practice of political philosophy as described above. Rationalist and constructivist methodologies. Just as one can find aspects of both political theory and political philosophy in this book's argument, so too can one find elements of both rationalist and constructivist methodologies. Rationalism, or rational choice theory, is positivist in nature. At the individual level, it emphasizes the goal of utility maximization via cost-benefit analyses, processes of strategic interaction, as well as collective action problems. This book reflects a rationalist outlook in its recognition of collective action problems arising over public goods provision, as well as revolutionary strategy. In contrast to the rationalist emphasis on individual self-interest and strategic interaction, constructivism focuses primarily on the power of ideas as well as the historical dialectical process unfolding at the structural level. While rationalist methods, including rational choice theory, focus on individuals' self-interests and remain normatively neutral, constructivist methodology, as I understand it, involves analyzing as well as promoting historical progress. From the perspective of libertarian social democracy, the central idea advanced in this book, history tends toward equal liberty maximization, although such developments depend crucially on individual choices. A weakly deterministic philosophy of history. As will be discussed further in the introductory chapter, the philosophy of history underpinning this book's methodology can be described as weakly deterministic. That term is adopted from Fukuyama's 1992 book, The End of History and the Last Man, where it was used to emphasize the importance of both structural or macro-level developments, constructivism, as well as individual choice and agency, rationalism, in shaping the actual course of history. With regards to modern historical developments, one can identify dialectical processes, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, roughly corresponding to this book's argument in the three primary realms of social life. In the political realm, this is reflected in the historical progression from the modern sovereign state to classical anarchism to the democratic transitionary state. In the economic realm, this is reflected in the progression from capitalism to socialism to the libertarian mixed economy. In the cultural realm, this is reflected in the transition from absolutism to classical liberalism to libertarian social democracy. In The Ecology of Freedom, Bookchin emphasizes that the goal of philosopher Georg Hegel's dialectics is to comprehend the whole, or totality, rather than the methodological process of thesis, antithesis, synthesis itself. According to this book's argument, historical developments within each of the three aforementioned realms converge into the larger social system which I will refer to as libertarian social democracy. That is, libertarian social democracy is the paradigmatic idea which subsumes more specific developments in the political, economic, and cultural realms. I also make use of the Hegelian term summum bonum a few times in the book, in reference to equal liberty maximization as a historical destination and teleological endpoint. Referencing and citation style. Many publications were reviewed over the course of this book's development, and it relies heavily on substantiating quotes and references from a variety of sources. There are a few advantages to this approach. First, conducting an extensive literature review allows one to stand on the shoulders of giants, Isaac Newton's expression, and, relatedly, to avoid reinventing the wheel with regard to the ideas expressed. Second, conducting a thorough literature review mitigates the challenge of presenting a radical argument while still being viewed as an adult in the room, by raising awareness of potential pitfalls, nuance, and counterarguments. A third benefit is more diffuse. A thorough literature review is more likely to alert readers to useful sources on topics of interest, facilitating stronger contributions to theory building. Despite the large number of publications reviewed, given the broad nature of this book's central topics, anarchism and social revolution, and the vast amount of relevant scholarship on those and more specific subsumed topics, some relevant works will not be reviewed in time for this book's publication. Consequently, some worthy publications will remain unengaged, and some important theoretical nuance possibly overlooked. With regard to the many references included, scholarly publications, books, and peer-reviewed journal articles are cited parenthetically within the text, followed by a full works cited section at the end of each chapter. Brackets are occasionally added within parenthetical citations to indicate the original publication year of an older work, and within quotes to distinguish my own words from those drawn directly from the source. All online sources, op-eds, news briefs, reports, and some articles, are fully cited in footnotes rather than the list of works cited. Chapter 6 especially relies on many online sources. Most of the online sources cited are either politically neutral mainstream news sources, such as the British Broadcasting Corporation and the Pew Research Center, or news updates from left-of-center sources such as Democracy Now! There are also some references to conservative online sources such as the New York Post, although these are fewer in number. Roadmap. Part 1 of this book presents a vision of anarchism and is separated into 4 chapters. Chapter 1 sketches out a historical context, provides an overview of the book's argument, and describes the potential interdisciplinarity between anarchism and comparative politics. That is followed by chapters focusing on anarchism in the political, Chapter 2, economic, Chapter 3, and cultural realms, Chapter 4. Part 2 focuses on social revolution, especially in the United States. Chapter 5 lays out an elite class theoretic alternative to the pluralist paradigm, thus providing a foundation for chapters 6, 7, and 8. Chapter 6 aims to demonstrate the moral justification for revolutionary as opposed to reformist change. Chapter 7 discusses revolutionary objectives in the political, economic, and cultural realms. Chapter 8 presents an argument for revolutionary as opposed to reformist or hybrid strategy. The concluding chapter summarizes key aspects of the book's argument and contribution. Acknowledgements. This book has taken several years to complete. I began developing it in the late 2016 while a postdoctoral researcher at the University of West Florida in Pensacola. The book expands on 2 articles which themselves developed over the course of several years. Those articles, which I began while a doctoral student at the University of California, Riverside, focused separately on the topics of social revolution and anarchism, and were eventually published in the journal Theory in Action in 2016 and 2018, respectively. Along the way, there have been several individuals whose help, whether direct or indirect, contributed to the gradual development of this book and should therefore be acknowledged. While an undergraduate at California State University in San Marcos, CSUSM, in 2006, visiting Professor Anthony O'Halloran introduced me to the Good Friday Agreement in his class on the politics of Northern Ireland, and thus sparked my interest in comparative politics and, more specifically, the fascinatingly paradoxical idea that proportional representation and a multi-party system can help to promote legislative consensus building. Meanwhile, Dr. Cyrus Mazruri, professor of political science at CSUSM, introduced me to anarchist philosophy by assigning Michael Bakunin's God and the State in one of his political theory courses I'd taken. At the University of California in Riverside, UCR, where I eventually acquired my PhD in political science in 2014, Professor John Larson provided useful comments on one of my aforementioned Theory in Action articles titled States as Instruments of Anarchism, and assigned it as a reading in his graduate seminar on anarchism during the spring 2016 semester. I also appreciate insightful feedback on an earlier version of that paper from my acquaintances Matthew Snyder and Brian Kim while attending UCR. Thanks are also owed to another acquaintance, Dan Magis, for allowing me to present an early version of my article on social revolution in his class at Golden West Community College in Huntington Beach, California in 2014. I also appreciate the opportunity to present the early version of that article at the James C. Young Colloquium, organized by the Student Association of Graduate Anthropologists at UCR in March of 2014. I should also acknowledge the assistance of philosophy professor Nicholas Power at the University of West Florida, where I worked as a postdoctoral research associate during the 2016-17 academic year. Professor Power provided useful comments on the Anarchism manuscript shortly before it was accepted for publication in Theory in Action. I also wish to thank John Asimakopoulos, editor of Theory in Action, who accepted my two aforementioned studies for publication and for providing an opportunity to guest edit a special issue of that journal on anarchism and democracy, published in January of 2020, further enhancing my understanding of the topics. Nearer to completion of the manuscript, I received valuable suggestions from Marcus Lundstrom and Leonard Williams as well, for which I am grateful. Finally, I wish to thank the 3 anonymous reviewers for useful comments and suggestions, as well as Lorraine Klimwich and Rahul Srinivasan at Springer for helping me through the editorial process. Without the help of those individuals, this book would not have achieved the level of quality that it has. Finally, it should also be mentioned that I bear full responsibility for any imperfections, author misrepresentations, theoretical oversights, holes in the argument, factual inaccuracies, etc., found in the following chapters. Brian Williams, Cortland, New York,